guys, it's Lindsay and welcome back to my channel. So today I thought I would share my process of how I transitioned from writing YA to middle grade. In this video I'm going to share the 5 things that I felt like I needed to change, and then a few things that I feel like don't need to change when you're transitioning that are like common misconceptions. And I do just want to preface this video by saying this is my process, this is what worked for me, this is what I needed to change. This is by no means a prescriptive how-to video, so if something in here doesn't work for you or you already were doing these things and didn't need to change them, I am so happy for you, bub! When you're transitioning from YA to middle grade, there are a few obvious changes that are going to change. Most notably is your word count is usually going to get smaller, your target demographic audience is going to get younger, and then just in general it's a good idea to keep in mind the market differences. YA is a lot more saturated than middle grade, and because of that middle grade is more willing to take on debuts and risks and things like that. So it's just a good idea to keep all of these things in mind before you start your project. But all of those topics are pretty well discussed when you are doing research about how to make the transition, but I'm going to talk about a few things that are a little more obscure and maybe that you learn as you make the transition. So the first thing that I needed to learn to change was a voice. It's pretty obvious, but a 12-year-old's voice is going to sound very different from a 17-year-old's voice. And when writers talk about voice, it's like this, you know, nebulous thing that nobody can quite give a definition for, and it is very difficult to pin down. The best way that I can describe voice is that it is the way in which your main character like views the world, or the lens in which they see the world. I think the easiest way for me that I found to nail that younger child voice was to remember who I was as a 12-year-old, and then in that mindset write the book for 12-year-old Lindsay as 12-year-old Lindsay. So number 2 kind of feeds into number 1, but the next thing I needed to change was my word choice. Now I kind of include these two together because word choice is kind of the lens in which you tell the voice, and certain words work better for younger kids than for an older main character and for an older audience. I think one thing that is just so great about middle grade is that you can just have fun with word choices. Like, make words up, use the funniest words, use onomatopoeia, use alliteration, like just have fun with it. You can get away with so much more in middle grade. Adding on to that, I think you can really get away with more adjective use, because I know like in adult and YA never use adjectives, oh my gosh! Which I hate that rule anyway, because adjectives can be perfect sometimes in certain situations. Just rule of thumb, use everything sparingly, but use everything. I think it makes more sense for kids to use adjectives. Like a child would say, the bubbly juice flowed, and like not the effervescent beverage flowed over my tongue. Like, it's just silly. Use adjectives, it's fine. Third thing that I noticed that really needed to change was the central themes that you can explore in your book. And mainly by this, I mean the emphasis on family-centered themes. Now, widely, middle grade is accepted as the story being about a character learning how they fit within their family, and a YA story is centered on how a character fits within the world at large. Now, the very last one is a little bit interesting, I think, because this is where we leave the realm of black and white rules that are listicles that you can find online, and where we kind of have to discern and do some guesswork based on just diving into the genre you're writing for and just reading a lot and seeing what the norms are. Basically, number 4 is topics you can explore. And these aren't like hard set rules, I'm sure there are exceptions, but basically they're just more like gentle guidelines based on what other middle grade writers have published in the past that kind of give you permission to explore. That's a big thing about just traditional publishing and in general. They like safety, they like selling things and topics they know that are going to be received well. So like that's just a whole thing. But yeah, I know there are exceptions, but in general, the rule of thumb, if you will, is blood but no gore, no on-page murders or assaults or rapes or anything like that. They can be explored, I believe, I've seen it done, just not on page. And then there's really not a discussion on sexual maturity, periods, things like that. You know, things that these kids around this age are actually dealing with. It's kind of almost taboo to discuss. Don't come for me. I'm just telling you what's popular in the genre. And I just want to reiterate, like, I think it would be nice to explore some of these things, but it just hasn't been done by middle grade authors in the genre that are like the big name titles that get the money, that make the sales, so that publishers will allow more books like that to explore things like sexual maturity. However, we are seeing a few new books come out that are exploring like sexual orientation, which I think is a step in the right direction. But we're still on the cusp of it. Like, I still think we have a bit more to go until we start giving these kids books with things that they're really dealing with. I think at this point, if a kid wants to learn about like periods or sexual maturity, they're pretty much told to go read YA. So of course, this doesn't mean that you can't explore these things in your middle grade, but it might mean that you get flagged by beta readers or agents or editors in the future, just because traditional publishing is so normative. Like, they make sales based on what's sellable, what's safe, and what's been done in the past. I kind of have a fifth thing that I wrote down that it's kind of like a personal preference thing. Again, this is my experience and this is what I think. Tailor this to however you need for your middle grade journey. But I think that one thing that needs to change is that you really need to amp up your pacing. YA in general, they like publishers and agents really want like cutthroat pacing, like bam, bam, bam anyway. But I think that's even more important in middle grade. And that is because you're writing for a younger audience with an even shorter attention span, and you're competing with things like Xboxes. So you really need to keep their attention and keep kids hooked and keep them turning the pages. Now, I didn't want to like fully add this to the list just because this is my opinion and I actually don't really see this reflected in a lot of middle grade books. There is a conversation, I guess, that we could have about some literary writers who are writing like highbrow middle grade books, not for middle grade audience, like not for kids, because Lord have mercy, middle grade is not for kids. It's for the adults who read middle grade, who decide what categories and what books get to have the highly esteemed merited awards. And we're writing for the adults, so we can be the Pulitzer Prize of middle grade. And the pacing's really slow and it's really dense and it's really for adults. That's a topic for another day, folks. Just remember your audience. When you're writing for a YA group, write for YA. When you're writing for middle grade, Lord have mercy, write for children. That being said, I think there are a few things that don't need to change that people sometimes think do. Like, there's this big misconception that you need to dumb stories down for children. Don't do that. Kids will spot that BS miles away. Just because you're writing for a child doesn't mean that the plot should not be complex, the characters should be deep and well developed, the settings can be rich and atmospheric. Like, kids need that. That's amazing. Think of Harry Potter. That's not dumbed down. That's probably one of the smartest, most complex series I've ever read. And that started out for children. You can still have things like themes, metaphors, similes, symbols, motifs, all of these like fancy literary devices. You can still have those. A kid might not get it, maybe, but that doesn't mean you can't have it there for yourself or for your other writer friends or for the adults that are reading the kids' books. Like, you can still have all of these complex things in a middle grade. And another thing that doesn't need to change is the plot beats or the arcs of the character and the plot. Those things don't need to change. In fact, if you've read books like Story Genius, Anatomy of Story, even Save the Cat has plot beats, they'll still work for middle grade too. And that overall, the structure of the story itself doesn't need to change. I hope this video made sense. I felt like it was very all over the place. It's very difficult to try to talk about the things that I've learned and the things I've changed because I feel like I'm still learning, like I'm still in the process of learning how to write in middle grade. I've only just started my second one. So if you yourself have anything that you've noticed that needs to change when you started your middle grade, please drop it in the comments below so I can learn because I still have a lot of work to do on getting better. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!